You see the chart called The Path to Leadership in Gaming? Yes. Do you agree with the projections that are expressed in this chart? I do not believe that that is what the future Xbox business would look like. This is a presentation from our devices organization to the gaming leadership team. So this is the view from the team that is chartered with building our hardware on what the future business would look like. I can fairly safely say that if we do not make more progress than this off of console, we would exit the gaming business. Well, how wrong is it? How would you rearrange the chart basically to make it more accurate for your projection of 2030? I wasn't trying to make a counter prediction. I was just saying if this were the outcome, I don't believe we'd still be in the business by 2030. And what outcome are you driving towards so that you could still be in the business? Well, a majority of our customers will need to be found outside of Xbox consoles. And through that, I would hope we beat these goals by earlier than 2030. And when is it your goal to have a majority of Xbox subscribers off console? By financial year 2026 or 2027, we should be in that position, or we'd have to make a different decision with Xbox. This channel describes itself as one that analyzes gaming hardware and the companies that make it. And of course, then that includes consoles like PlayStations and Xboxes. But to be honest, I'd say this channel is 90% about the PC side of things. And so, well, when we talk about consoles, it's usually because something big happened. And boy, this week there was something big that leaked out about, well, everything having to do with the Xbox business model and their future plans. Now, what this leak of documents pertaining to the FTC's investigation of Microsoft's acquisition of Activision-Blizzard included all types of things like hints that Microsoft doesn't have firm plans to make any notable upgrades to either the Xbox Series X or S hardware outside of really bragging about them using recyclable materials, and that furthermore, they may actually launch the true successors after the PS6 is already out, and that's likely because, well, they are running out of time to make Game Pass sustainable, and clearly, if you go through the documents that leaked this week, it is all about making Game Pass sustainable. The console hardware side of it isn't even a secondary importance to Microsoft. They may even try to buy Nintendo and Valve to brute force this issue after the Activision acquisition, and no, all of these acquisitions happening, they are not going to let other people play these games. This is about walling off access and forcing up subscription numbers of Game Pass. Now, that last part, that's what the bulk of this video is actually going to be about, because the data leaked from this disaster has incredibly damning behind-the-scenes proof of a failing business model and Phill Spencer's anti-competitive tendencies. But before I get to that, I actually do want to briefly cover the tidbits in this leak that have to do with stuff that's not exclusively interesting to Xbox fans, right? Namely, future stuff about AMD, which a lot of PC gamers online have been discussing from this leak this week, namely mentions of Zen 6 and RDNA 5. And to be entirely honest, though, the RDNA 5 stuff on this slide that's been making the rounds, it's not that surprising to me. It's saying that RDNA 5, like this channel has been talking about for a while, of a much greater ability to do ray tracing and will use machine learning to accelerate FSR, like this channel exclusively leaked it would a while ago. And, well, it also does, though, mention the use of a thinner OS, which would make sense to me. A lot of devs that I speak to think that the operating system on Xbox consoles since the Xbox One really have been a little heavy, too PC-like, and holding back the peak performance they may be able to achieve. So it's good to see that there's at least a part of Microsoft that's trying to solve that. But outside of that, I actually need to back up what Kepler said on Twitter. I wouldn't be so sure that every specific physical thing described in the leaked documents that came out this week are actually going to be stuff that will be productized. In fact, in that opening quote by Phill Spencer that you listened to at the beginning of this video, he directly suggested that many presentations at Microsoft, which is a massive company, are often just what one group is estimating, planning, or proposing to other groups. It's not set in stone just because one part of a massive company talks about it. And while I have definitely heard about a 6nm Xbox Series S, and I do at least expect that thing to come out, and I publicly leaked that I thought it would years ago, I have also heard about a proper elite upgrade in performance refresh for this generation that's not necessarily approved to go forward, but is waiting for Phill Spencer to pull the trigger on it. And I have also heard about x86 next generation Xbox APU designs that are a traditional performance increase. So I'm not saying those ones necessarily will come out, nor that the ARM64 ones should be completely disregarded, but it is just a proposal from one part of the company about an idea, I think, for the next-gen Xbox. I mean, heck, if I'm being honest here, I find the mention of Zen 6 in this proposal a little weird when they also talk about launching this console in 2028 or 2029 or 2030. From what I've heard, Zen 6 should be out mid or late 2025, and then Zen 7, or actually I've been told they may even evolve past Zen to some new sort of architecture. That should definitely be ready by 2028. So I don't know why they'd be going with a Zen architecture. I'm guessing that part of it is just a placeholder, and I'm guessing that ARM64 thing is just something they're looking into. But so then what I'm really saying is, I think the most analysis people should be doing right now is all about the mentality of Microsoft's Xbox division, not doubling down on one proposal from a group. And if I were to analyze their mentality, and now I'm going to, the mere fact that there is a major faction within Microsoft proposing going with ARM64 and hyping up cloud and hybrid consoles tells you that it seems like there is a contingent within Microsoft that thinks they should kind of just give up on trying to directly compete with Sony in performance next gen, and that really the focus should be on greater accessibility, while the next gen Xbox should certainly have new capabilities for ray tracing and machine learning, accelerated upscaling, that the focus really shouldn't be on raw performance, that right now they shouldn't release refreshed consoles that up performance. They should release refreshed consoles that up other features so they keep the lowest common denominator as low as possible so that next gen, well, their games can still run on some really cheap devices. And, well, I don't know if Phil agrees with this strategy, and he certainly openly says in some documents that he doesn't agree with their projections. He also, if anything, thinks that their projections aren't good enough, that Xbox actually needs to somehow get a ridiculous amount of Game Pass subs as soon as possible, one way or another. And to highlight how behind Xbox is in getting to where they think they need to be, well, let's bring up the fact that they openly said last year that they had hit 25 million Game Pass subs and that this just wasn't good enough. But then later, near the end of last year, Sony projected that maybe they had upped it a bit. They had gone from 25 million subs to 29 million Xbox Game Pass subs. Well, from the FTC leak this week, it is now official that actually, if anything, Sony is overestimating their competition, overestimating how many gamers actually want to use Game Pass. Apparently, it's quite possible that Xbox actually lost subs last year, and Phill Spencer is on record saying that at a minimum and at best, Game Pass subs were flat through last year. But what about Starfield? Could Phill Spencer possibly be banking on Starfield saving Game Pass subscriptions and catching back up to where he says they need to be, which is really almost double where they are now, for being honest? Well, recent data doesn't suggest that it has really saved anything. In fact, if you go and look at Steam Starfield data, the consensus out there is that the game has likely sold 2 to 4 million copies on Steam. And then, at least in Europe, we know that Starfield has outsold Resident Evil 4 Remake, which Capcom announced had sold about 3 million copies in its first 2 days. So I don't know. We know that Starfield has at least probably 2 to 4 million real owners on Steam. We know that it's outsold Resident Evil 4 Remake, which means it sold it over 3 or 4 million, probably globally as well. And then we also know that it has been reported that 10 million people have tried Starfield. But think about what that means. That is 10 million people who have played Starfield, not purchased outside of Game Pass. So the top number of players is 10 million people, and then we know that 2 to 4 million come from Steam, and there's probably another, 4 million out there, maybe 2 million out there, and maybe some of that overlaps. But all of this points to not an exact percentage we can double down on, but a pretty firm suggestion that at best, a little over half of the Starfield players are people from Game Pass, and it's totally believable that perhaps less than a fourth of Starfield players bothered to do so through Game Pass, meaning it is incredibly unlikely that Starfield boosted Game Pass numbers more than a few million, and it may have not boosted them that much at all, especially when you consider, well, the 25 million people that already had Game Pass, those may have been all of those people that tried Starfield through it already. Maybe it wasn't that many new people. And with that out of the way, I think it's time to get to really the biggest bombshell conclusion that I have after chewing through so much meat out of this FTC Xbox leak. And this is the thickest part of the meat. But before I put it on screen, I want to just summarize again everything I was just talking about. Right? In the beginning of this video, we just showed quotes on screen. Phill Spencer believes that this chart here from a contingent within Microsoft, this isn't enough. If they hit these numbers, it isn't enough to make Xbox Game Pass and the Xbox unit itself a sustainable business, that they might have to fundamentally change or close up shop. And then we also know that the past couple years of Game Pass have been very good ones, actually, that there was a surge at the start of the pandemic, but then after about 2021, things started going really flat, and big releases like Starfield, there's no evidence that's boosting numbers substantially. Most people, or at least around half, are still choosing to just buy the game so they can own it on the platform they prefer, like Steam, and play it whenever they want, forever. All right, enough yammering. Let me put this graph I made on screen. And note, the blue line that you are looking at is from publicly available data that Microsoft has reported, usually around the first quarter before the end of each Microsoft financial year. And if we look at that, and I only pulled from recently leaked information from this FTC debacle for the first few years because, well, that just wasn't out there as far as I could tell. And for good reason. It seems like they had basically no Game Pass subs in the first few years. Well, if you take all of that officially reported data and then you create a polynomial trend line, I can project forward what should be the Game Pass subscription numbers year after year up until 2030 based on not hopium, but based on what has actually been happening. And note that it has an R squared value of over 0.96, meaning it's supposedly pretty dang accurate as a predictor for future subscription numbers. And you'll notice it's below that green line. The red line that comes from the polynomial trend line is below the green line, and that green line is the subscription projection that Phill Spencer says isn't going to be good enough for Xbox to not be closed for business. Now, a few things to clarify on screen here. Why is the officially reported numbers, the blue line, in 2023 below the green line? Well, remember, that green projection came from before recent official numbers, meaning that, yeah, they're already below where they thought they would be a year ago, which isn't good. And why is there a sudden jump in the red line? And seemingly the green line, too, eventually. Well, that's because right around now, Microsoft has announced that they are going to call Xbox Gold Xbox Game Pass Core. And that to me means almost 100% chance that Microsoft is going to then take the around 11.7 million Xbox Live Gold subs and pretend they're Xbox Game Pass subs so it looks good on financial reporting. And I'm assuming that Greenline knew they were going to do this, but probably a year ago assumed that they would have already made the announcement, but they didn't. So that's why the green line has this sudden jump before the red line does, and then the red line almost looks linear. Although it's not linear, it actually takes into account a slight curve upwards. But yeah, so there you go. I don't know what Phill Spencer is smoking when he says they need to get higher sub numbers per year than what that one business unit and Microsoft suggested they could get. Because if you model their current trajectory, they are well below that green line. And if we're being honest, the red line is pretty damn ambitious. It suggests that by about 2030, they will be over 80 million Game Pass subscribers. But Phil doesn't just think that's not enough. He thinks that green line's not enough. Meaning what, Phil? What are you suggesting? You actually think that within like 5 years, you're going to get close to 100 million subs? And then what, over 120 million subs by 2030? 150? What would be enough to make this business model work? Because what seems to be suggested by Phil is that they need to become as successful as Netflix was 5 years ago for Xbox Game Pass to be a sustainable business model. I just don't really see it. I don't see how, with the existing business model Xbox has, they can get to those insane numbers. Which, yeah, that's probably why there is this business unit that we've just learned within Microsoft that basically thinks they need to fundamentally change their vision of Xbox, because if they don't, they're going to fail. It's either that, I suppose, or Microsoft needs to not only buy Activision, but buy Nintendo and Valve, which, yep, came out this week that Phill Spencer says he wants to do that. And if that were to start happening, I'm just going to say it. I don't know how anyone with a brain can make an argument that Microsoft isn't trying to make Xbox a game studio monopoly so that you have to buy Game Pass, whether you like it or not, to play half of the games out there. And I can't help but think that the line of questioning that I covered today by the FTC with Phill Spencer was kind of getting at that. They were trying to get him to slip up and say, yeah, we can't afford this business model. We basically have to buy everyone else to make it work. But he was smart in how he danced around saying that. And I don't know, my guess is the FTC just sees Activision as not quite the straw that breaks the camel's back. But I'd be very surprised after all of this information that came out that they didn't think that everything else from now on that's even close to that size of an acquisition will be something that they will block. But make no mistake, they are aware that Phill Spencer wants to acquire Nintendo and Valve, and I can't help but think that Activision, if it does go through, is the last thing that's that big that Microsoft will be able to acquire that isn't blocked by the FTC and other regulatory bodies. And, you know, on that note, I guess I just have to close on saying this. Phil is clearly, in the emails that have emerged, not the humble pro gamer guy that he pretends to be online. He's a suit. He is a suit, just like everyone else that gets to his position of success. And that really shouldn't surprise anybody. But if you are surprised, from now on, these are his words, not mine. It's now public. He's the one that wants to win by buying out all competition, not just Activision, but also Nintendo and Valve, and therefore remove competition so you have to submit to their business model that, again, his words, not mine, he is saying is unsustainable and may lead to the collapse of Xbox itself. So I guess that's what we will close on. We now know it is official that Microsoft either needs to fundamentally change its Xbox business model again, or succeed in buying up all competition so everyone has to buy Game Pass, or Xbox is just a house of cards about to collapse. I guess we'll find out in 5 years which one it is.